Hey everybody, welcome back to the Better Not Bitter podcast. Today I have a special guest with me, but before we get to know her a little bit more, make sure you like, comment, subscribe, tell a friend, you know all those wonderful things. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you Miss Destiny Bridsong.
Hello.
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing well. I'm happy to be here. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm thankful that we got a chance to do this conversation.
Yeah, me too.
So could you introduce yourself or talk about yourself, brag on yourself a little bit for the people who don't know you?
Well, I'll try. My name is Destiny Birdsong. I'm a writer. Have one book out, a collection of poems called Negotiations. There's a second book coming out in February called Nobody's Magic. It's fiction. And it's about 3 women with albinism who live in my hometown or have connections with my hometown. And there are a lot of themes, you know, certainly like identity and family and love and, you know, loss and friendship and all of those different things. So, so that's what I do. I write. So
that's so awesome. I'm excited to check it out. I'm always like excited when I find out that someone with albinism is putting something out there that other people can gain knowledge and insight from. So I'm curious to know, like, what was your upbringing like and what was life like for you having albinism?
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in Shreveport, Louisiana. It's a pretty small town, right in the little corner of the state between Arkansas and Texas. Well, maybe not a small town, like a small city. And I grew up with my mom and my older sister. And my mom had a twin sister who was disabled. And so she lived with us. And so it was just the 4 of us. And like, that's how I grew up. I had cousins and neighborhood kids I played with and best friends at school and all that stuff. And, you know, childhood was interesting for me. I certainly had my share of just terrible people. But I also always had friends. I had at least like a small group of friends that, you know, I hung out with and they were willing to hang out with me. So, so that was fun, but it certainly wasn't, it wasn't always pleasant. But I was a pretty rambunctious kid. I loved playing outside. I would sort of run around with the other kids. I had a neighbor. His name was Gerald, and he was like my best friend. I was a little tomboyish as a kid, and Gerald used to call me Apple Eyes because my eyes were green, and that was my buddy. Yeah, and then his family moved to Texas, and so but yeah, like I guess it was fairly normal. Like, I mean, I played, I got in trouble over things. I was also precocious. I was very talkative. I like to ask questions. I talked back a little bit. It was a pretty, I think it was a pretty cool childhood. Yeah. Not always
That's
easy, but
awesome.
good. Yeah.
That's awesome. I always like to hear about other people with albinism experience and other people in
Mhm.
general who don't have albinism, because we all have similarities and things that we have in common and things that are different. And it's just always interesting to hear about those things. So during your childhood or adolescence, when exactly did writing come about, and how did that end up being your profession?
It was inevitable. Like I grew up in a family that didn't have a lot of money, but
Mm-hmm.
books were free. And so my mom would like take us
Mm.
to the library every few weeks and we would just check out as many books as we could. So I would, even before I was a writer, like I was a reader. I loved oh my gosh, what were some of my favorite books? I loved the Ramona series with Ramona Quimby. I loved Fudge and Super Fudge. I loved Mrs. Pigglewiggle. I was always really into books because they could just take me out of my little town. Like they were the gateway to somewhere else, and so they were always interesting to me. But I have a really specific memory of writing my first poem. I don't know if it was the first thing. It wasn't the first thing I ever wrote, but like it's the moment that kind of feels like that was my moment. Like I was like, okay, I think this is a thing I want to do. And I was in the seventh grade, and at the time, I'm gonna date myself, so you know how old I am. But the Batman cartoon, it was like early '90s, and I watched Batman after school, Tiny Toon Adventures, Animaniacs. I was on all that. But there's an episode of Batman where he visits this island, this kind of like Dr. Moreau-esque island, where there are these half human, half animal beings, and there was this half panther, half man there who was like evil and was like doing terrible things. And Batman kept quoting what I didn't know at the time, but was a William Blake poem. Lines from the William Blake poem, The Tiger, 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 burning bright in the forest of the night. And I remember watching that episode and then like writing a poem immediately after. And I just remember that sort of being the moment where I first felt like swept up in doing something that I really loved and that felt really important at the time. And so that for me was like my watershed moment. But, I was always into books. I would, write little things. My mom has this like little booklet of like the story I wrote for this program I was in elementary school. It was kind of like we had like three sets of kids. You had like, the kids who were just in regular classes. You had the kids who were like in the gateway classes, which was like a precursor for GT. And then you had the kids who were in discoveries, who were like kind of in the middle. And I was in discoveries. And so we got to leave class, a couple of times a week, and we would just do stuff like as a group. And so I put together like a little picture book as part of a project I was doing in discoveries. And my mom still has that book. So I feel like it was always there, but there's definitely a moment when I felt a shift and I felt like this is something that I really like doing and that I want to do indefinitely. And I feel like Batman was that moment. So
That's so cool. Also, I wasn't a 90s kid. I was a 90s baby, but I'm well versed in the 90s cartoons.
yeah, they were
Uh,
so good. Like I still watch
mhm.
them.
Yeah.
Like I
I
still
was
enjoy
watching I was watching one today, and a couple weeks ago I was watching Hey Arnold, you
them.
know.
Yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. So
That is so cool, and it takes me. I don't know. I like to visualize things, so I was visualizing little you falling in love with writing, and it reminds me of kind of my experience with writing. Like I grew up with a parent who worked at a library. So
Mm.
I would just go there, and that was like I'd spend the entire day in the children's book section, and I'd read books
Mm-hmm.
by Maya Angelou and, of course, Piggly Wiggly.
Mm-hmm.
What was it? Judy Moody, Judy B. Jones, all those books and
Mm-hmm.
stuff, and I would just get lost.
Yeah.
And then I eventually started writing poetry, but it's really cool how you can see signs of what you're called to do as a
Mhm.
kid if you pay attention and look back at it.
Yeah, I was talking about this a few months ago. I have this really distinct memory too, of being like a younger than the seventh grade. I may have been maybe like, I don't know, first or second grade or something. And back in the day, like first of all, back in the day, people used home phones, but also back in the day, like if if somebody was on the phone, you could kind of pick up the other phone in another room and like hear what they were talking about. And I did that. And I remember hearing my mom and one of my mom's friends talking to my great grandmother, who was like an avid like church speech writer and speaker. And my great grandmother was like basically like dictating like a church speech for one of my mom's friends. And I don't know why that was so interesting to me. I'm not even sure why I picked up the phone, because it's just like my mom and one of her friends, like they usually weren't talking about things I was interested in. But I just remember that moment, and like even now I think back to that like the word was like in my blood in a lot of ways. My great grandmother was a great speaker, and so that's just words off the page, like, right, like, so I think of that too as like a moment where I got sort of a glimpse into what I would be doing, and that's, yeah, it is fascinating when you think back to those sort of pivotal um moments and experiences.
That's so cool. Thank you for sharing that. Um, that kind of reminds me of the role that family plays in our lives, whether we realize it at the time or not. Could you talk about how much family has played a role in what you do now?
Yeah, definitely. I didn't know it as a kid, but I grew up around people who were just great artists, of all kinds. My mom was like really great at like making things. She would make T-shirts and hair bows, and she would make, what else would she make? My sister doesn't remember this, but I remember my mom making like a solar system for my sister's science fair. Um, and now she makes like baskets for people and like sort of picks out all the things to put in them. And I had my mom's uncle could like play the piano, but had no formal training, but could just sort of like sit down and play. I think the guitar too. Like I have a couple of family members. I have a cousin who's like this too. Like they can just like pick up instruments and learn them. And my uncles were like great bakers. I have an uncle who like makes jellies and cakes, and my cousin, who's one of the people who can like play the instruments like without training, he also like he makes soap and lotion and like just like really creative people. I have an aunt who like just grows these beautiful plants that are just like huge, like ivies that are like crawling up the walls. And so I think, I really grew up around people who had an eye for beauty and who knew how to make things beautiful. And I am completely convinced that influenced my becoming an artist. Just having an example of, people older than me who could take things that like weren't necessarily didn't seem like they were worth much, or taking like things that didn't cost a lot of money and just like making these really gorgeous things out of them. So yeah,
That's
definitely.
amazing. Sounds like your family is very, very talented.
I think so. I feel like I feel like I came from people who had gifts, had so many
Yeah,
gifts. And I'm grateful for that.
that's awesome. Um, with writing or writers, something I noticed is that there seems to be a common theme where the writing is inspired by life events. So, for your essays, for your articles, for your poems, what tends to be that one thing that when you need inspiration, you could just go to it and it never fails?
Um, well, I guess the simplest answer for that is just life. I write about the things that are important to me, that are interesting to me. I write to make sense of things. If something is happening that I don't completely understand, I will journal about it. And so I'm not necessarily like looking for like my next project, right? But I am always thinking about starting conversations on the page about things that I think are important discussions. So it's just, life, lived experiences, trying to work past those lived experiences, like any combination thereof. That's what inspires me.
Oh, that is so cool. And again, when I talk to people who write and create things, that tends to be the same answer. Like, even for me as a musician,
Mm-hmm.
poet, all the hats I wear, even with graphic design, life tends to be a source of inspiration. Even, things like chronic illness and disability. I tend to draw from those things. And I find that the things that I'm most vulnerable about tend to touch people the most.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Because I think there's something really awesome about reading someone else's story and realizing that like you aren't the only person that a thing has happened to, like I think that's just that is a really wonderful gift to give the world. And it's a really wonderful gift for the world to receive, so yeah, absolutely. I think I agree. I feel like the things that I am often the most afraid of writing about are the things that are the most resonant with people. So
Whew, that was a bar. You're preaching today. I'm interested again to kind of, pick your brain and see what college was like for you. I just graduated from college, and of course, there was a lot of writing in undergrad, and I want to know what being in college was like, and then being a professor in college was like.
Yeah, so I went to undergrad at Fisk University, which is an HBCU here in Nashville, Tennessee, and it was it was an interesting experience being one of two people with albinism on campus. The other girl was a little older than me, and I think just maybe had a life away from campus, and so like wasn't always there. So in a lot of instances, like I was the one, like I was the only one. Um, College was interesting for me. I went through a lot of phases and I did a lot of stuff. But I also I had such a good education. Like I became a double major in English and history because I took history classes with this professor named Dr. Quirin, and he was just he knew so many things, and he would also make us read, in addition to like our history books, like we would read novels because, he felt like, if you want to learn about a culture, if you want to learn about a moment in history, then you have to look at the art that's being made at that time. And nobody had ever taught me history that way. And so I loved it. I loved learning in college. I didn't write as much poetry. I didn't write as much for myself when I was in college. I did like a little bit. So it wasn't until grad school that that I started writing for myself again. And so then that sort of led me to get my MFA in poetry and, sort of kind of set me on the path that I'm on now without my actually knowing it. I just kind of presumed that I would be I just kind of presumed that I was just going to finish grad school and become a professor and I would kind of write on the side. That's not what happened for me. I do not love teaching the way that I think you should love teaching because I had great professors, and if I'm going to be a professor, I want to be a great professor. But I will say that recently, so this week I'm teaching an online poetry workshop for actually, well, like my book is published by a press called Tin House, and Tin House also does like summer workshops for writers and things like that. So I've been teaching for them, and it's actually been a really good experience. And so I'm like, I maybe could go back, but I have enjoyed this time to myself to just write and like kind of figure out who I am as a writer. I am so sorry. I'm going to plug my computer in because the battery is getting a little low. So hold on.
It's okay. It's all good.
I didn't want to just randomly like duck down without.
So you're good.
But anyway, but yeah, I think, teaching for me, I mean, I was definitely teaching I was definitely teaching in a place like a private institution. I think that is really a specific thing. Like that's a very specific experience. And, I did not love it when I was doing it, but I do feel like it's such an important vocation, and I want to love it. And so I have been thinking about that recently about like, what would it be like to go back into the classroom? Because my workshop attendees this week have been amazing and like so brilliant. And like, they've let me talk about poems with them, and it's like gotten me excited again. And I think that is how it should feel when you're doing it. So like, I definitely know that, even if I don't necessarily know if it's a thing I would go back to. So
yeah, I appreciate your vulnerability, and it sounds to me like you have a gift to teach, but more so a gift to teach from what you're most passionate about. And that's what seems to give you joy. And that's cool.
Yeah, I've thought about that. Yeah, because like, so I have an MFA and a PhD. So when I finished my PhD, what I was teaching was like, composition, right? So like teaching students how to write, your basic college essay, or I was maybe teaching an intro to literature class. And I think the last year I was teaching, I finally taught a poetry workshop, and I liked it. But I still ended up leaving because the job I was working like ended. And I started doing something else. But I think you're right that like, if I am going to go back, I feel like workshop is probably my thing. Like, I don't necessarily want to teach like literary criticism or theory or anything like that. I'm really most interested in talking with people about how to make things, how to make art. So I think you're right. That's probably, if I'm going to go back, that's what I should be doing. Yeah.
Hey, whatever works for you. I remember, like I said, I just graduated college, and I remember several of the English related classes I had to take. And, you would think as someone who loves to write, who writes poetry, like, this would be fun. No brainer. Child, that English 101, it was easy, but it was boring, and and I had this contemporary poetry class, and the professor was just like very argumentative, to say the least, about every single line, and it just wasn't for me. Like, I even remember being in high school taking a creative writing course, and I could not stand that I had to write something on the spot that they wanted me to write. And that may sound a little rebellious, but I've come to find that when it's something I'm passionate about, that's when I do my best writing. Like, I remember being in a psychology of physical activity class because my major was kinesiology. And it came time to pick subjects for different topics we were talking about. And I had the option to choose to write about gender inequality in the sports arena, or race and reconciliation of race in athletics. I chose the latter because that's something that I'm passionate about, and it ended up being one of the best grades I got. So I definitely see how there's a correlation between what we're passionate about and the things that we have to do. Although not everything we do is going to be fun, but
yeah, that's
if
true.
you're gonna spend like 2/3 of your life working at something, I would hope that we would enjoy it.
Yeah, I many years ago I went to a sort of a day-long conference at my like grad school alma mater, and it was basically a conference for people who were getting graduate degrees, but didn't necessarily want to work in the academy. And there's this really interesting panel of, you know, professionals who worked in different fields. One of them was like working in like healthcare administration. And I think another one was maybe working in at a nonprofit or something like that. And one of them said something that's always stuck with me. She was like, you know, and I think she actually got this from her husband, but it's like, you should break down your professional life into 3 parts. And like a third of the time you should be doing things you love. A third of the time you should be doing things you don't hate, but like you wouldn't do if you didn't have to. And then a third of the time you should be doing the things that excite you. And I've always felt like that was such a really, like, that was such a good ratio, right? For like sort of gauging whether or not a job like brought me joy. Because it's like, if I'm spending, you know, 2/3 of that time doing things that either I like or excite me, I think that's a pretty good ratio. I mean, because you're always going to do stuff you hate. You know, some people hate replying to emails. Some people hate making copies. Some people hate doing like, you know, course prep, like whatever. You know, that you'd be hard pressed to get a job that you love doing every single thing, you know, related to it every single day. Like even with writing, like there are times when there are just things I don't necessarily feel like doing, but they have to get done in order for the next thing to happen. But I just think that's a good ratio for like gauging, you know, whether it's right for me, you know.
I have a question that kind of goes along with that. A couple weeks ago, I had an interview or a conversation with my mentor, Pastor Roy Dockery. Shout out to him. And we were talking about busyness versus productivity in terms of like being disabled or having a chronic illness. And I asked him, I said, hey, what would you say is one of the best ways to find what you're good at, what you're productive at, and what your purpose to do? And he was like, when it comes to finding that out, the best way to figure it out is by serving others. And as writers and creatives, that is something that we end up doing. And if anything, the pandemic kind of highlighted it, because when there were no athletics, when there was no entertainment, people ran to the things that they put off for so long, and they ran to the things and the people that were creating even throughout the pandemic. Right. So to that, I'd like to ask you, at what point did you realize, like, man, I need to take this more seriously? This is what I'm purposed to do. Like, at what point did that light bulb go off?
Yeah, so actually, like, you think that it went off as a teenager, but actually it didn't happen until like a few years ago. So like I got an MFA in poetry. I finished in like 2009. And I did both at the same time, which I'm not sure why I chose that route, but I finished it. But immediately after finishing the MFA, like I then sort of threw myself into my PhD work, because I'd been doing both at the same time. And it was like the summer after I graduated with my MFA, I had to do my comps, which is just like their exams that you take in grad school. It's like you just basically like write a bunch of essays. And then like there's a committee of people that ask you to sort of defend the arguments you posed in those essays. And so life was pretty hectic, like for the years after my MFA, and I was just finishing up another degree. And then when I got out, I started teaching, and I presumed I was going to go on the job market. And again, like just find that professor job and do whatever. But it was maybe around like, I think a couple of things happened. So the first thing that happened is like in 2015, I got really sick, and I was diagnosed with Crohn's, and I was still working and doing all these things. But I think what started to happen was that I started to realize that there was so little in life that I had control over. You know, like none of us can necessarily control something like an autoimmune disease diagnosis, right? Like sometimes that just happens, and it comes out of the blue and you're not prepared for it, and you didn't expect it, and you didn't want it. And so in the process of coming to terms with that, like I think I started to realize that like there's just so few things I have control over, but I do have control over, you know, what I write and doing what I love. And so It was maybe, I want to say like maybe mid to late 2015. I'd also finished up, I'm a part of a poetry fellowship program called Cave Canem. It's for Black poets. Cave Canem is Latin for beware of the dog. And so I had gone to like my last retreat in the summer of 2015, and like just kind of at the retreat and shortly after, I was like, I miss this. I miss poetry. Like, this is what I want to do. This is what I should be doing. I didn't think it was a thing I would do exclusively, but I definitely felt like it was a thing that like I needed to sort of reshift my focus back to. And so it was kind of late that year, and like sort of early 2016 that I started to refocus and sort of get back into it and start writing and start sending things out for publication. And then in 2017, I did a 30-30 challenge, which is a thing that poets will do during National Poetry Month. You write 30 poems in 30 days. And I did that really just, I wanted to finish my MFA thesis because I thought that my first book was going to be my MFA thesis. That is not what happened. And I'm glad that is not what happened, but that's what I thought. So I started on that journey with that goal in mind. And I did the 30-30 and then started putting the poems together and like realized that that I was writing a different book. So I started working on that book. And I was still working a regular job at the time. I was working for an oral history project with that was sort of like run by my dissertation advisor. So I was still doing that. But I was starting to make time for poetry. Like I was starting to like write things, try to publish things, thinking about a book. Then, after the 30-30 started working on the book. And again, like I just presumed it was a thing that I would be doing, just in the hours that I wasn't working my regular job. But at the end of 2019, I got laid off from my job. The project ran out of funding, and things had kind of built up by then. My first book had gotten picked up, and it was on it. It got published in October 2020. So it's like we were sort of like rounding up. We were sort of like finishing up we're finishing up the copy edits and things like that. And when I found out that I was gonna be let go from my job, I was just like, well, I've been moving toward this point where, I like writing is taking up more and more of my life, and I like it. And so I just thought like, well, like, why don't I just kind of see where this takes me? And so when I ended that job, I didn't get another one. And I just, I was like, I'm just going to try to ride this out and like see what happens. Now, at the same time, I was also writing prose. So I was writing nonfiction. I had, I think by the end of 2019, I had finished like a really rough draft of my novel. So I had some things I had some things in the works that I felt could sustain me. But it was, for me, it was a big deal to say, like, I am going to try to live as a writer, like live as a working writer. And so it was, so I think I just gave you a really long answer for what should have been like a really short question. But I think it started in 2015 and sort of like built up to that moment in 2019. And then the pandemic hit, which like changed so many things. But also, because this is the way that God works, like it made it easier for me to sustain myself. Like I had a couple of artist grants that were like COVID-19 related. And so it actually made the transition, I think it made the transition more possible. And then I sold my book that year in the summer of 2020. So, it's been just sort of like following the little breadcrumbs and trusting my instincts, and trusting my instincts at those like kind of like, fork in the road moments where it's like, I could do this or I could do this. And I try to really listen and like, trust what I'm being told is the right decision, which is terrifying, I will say. Trusting instincts and trusting God is like the scariest thing I've ever done in my life. It is terrifying. I'm like,
you ain't lying.
It is like, sometimes I have these moments of like, just like real, like faith crisis when I'm like, okay, I have done something that I'm not sure is the right decision. And like nothing in like the short term suggests that this is the right decision, but I believe it is the right one in the long run. And then I think back to like all those scriptures that like the adults made us learn as kids. And I'm like, is this what they meant? Like, this can't be, like, this is not what they meant. Like, you know, faith is the evidence, is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things like not seen. I'm like, nah, like they weren't talking about this because this is too hard. And it's like, actually they were. I just didn't know that's what it would take, right? Like you hear the story about, you hear the stories about like the 3 Hebrew boys, like Daniel in the lion's den. You're like, cool, right? Like that sounds great, but that's not what I'm trying to do. Like, you know, I'm trying to get faith to pay my car off. I'm not trying to like face down death. But like, but like, I mean, it really has been like a professional journey, but also a spiritual journey. And so, and yeah, like it's been terrifying, but it's also just been like making those decisions in those moments. Like, what do I believe to be true about myself? What do I believe to be true about my future? What do I believe to be true about the art that I'm making? How important is it? How important is it to me? What am I willing to give in order to like answer my calling? Right. And I don't think about, and, you know, I don't think about, you know, when I talk about writing as a calling, you know, I think when I was younger, I used to think like, oh yeah, like that's like wherever you're going to be like famous. But I think what a calling is like, it is a call to give. Right. So it's like, it's not about how much can I get? It's like, how much can I give? You know, like, and that's not just on the page. It's also like in terms of like community, you know, like all of my friends are writers. And so what we give each other in terms of support and affirmation and like workshopping and like reading each other's work and giving feedback, like that's also a part of the calling, is like what you're doing when no one is looking. So that's what I mean when I say calling. But it's like, those are the questions I have to ask myself in those moments. Like, what am I willing to give in order to answer that call? What am I willing to sacrifice? And sometimes the sacrifices just seem like they're just a little too much. but I have tried in the past few years anyway to be really faithful in my decisions and consistent in my decisions. You know, and now I feel like I'm at a point now, like, wow, I can't turn back now. Like, I'm too far in. I'm in too deep. So yeah. I don't know if that answered your question at all. I'm sorry.
It more than answered it. Never apologize for how short or long you got. We keep it 100, whatever that takes on this podcast. But that is so cool. Like, there's so many questions I got just from like you saying what you just said. One of the things that like I can really relate to is just like, okay, God, like I said yes and I'm doing the thing, but it don't look like the thing I'm doing is the thing that I'm really supposed to be doing, because you know, sometimes it can feel like the bottom's going to fall out, or security. There's not as much security outside of your comfort zone as it is inside the comfort zone. And that can be like scary, and it can raise the hairs on your arm and everything. But I'm learning that, like you said, faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things unseen. But I'm also learning like to actively wait for the results. Like,
That's
don't
so
just
hard.
yeah, it is. And I'm just learning to like, okay, while I'm waiting, what's the last thing he told me to do? Okay, I'm gonna focus on that. What's the last thing he put on my heart? I'm gonna do that. But while I'm waiting, I'm gonna be planning and praying about the future, but like, let me be faithful and consistent in this thing right here. And it can be a challenge, especially like having a chronic illness or even an autoimmune disease or a disability. Could you talk about how having an autoimmune disease has either helped you or really like challenged you in that area?
Yeah, right. I remember the day I was diagnosed. And you know, it's funny because it feels like that too was kind of a beginning of a journey. Like, I remember the day I was diagnosed, I was really scared. And I did not want that to be my reality. Like I wanted there. I was like, anything else besides this. And I remember like sitting in my room after getting the phone call, and I remember saying to God, I can't remember chapter and verse, but I remember saying to God, like, you know, if you were the author and the finisher of my faith, you have to finish this because I can't. Like I cannot see a future like living like this. So whatever you are supposed to finish, like you have to finish it now, because I can't do it. I can't do it by myself. And I mean, gosh, that was like a really hard prayer to pray. Not really knowing like what my future would look like. You know, I've had some really harrowing like medical experiences with medical professionals where people have like sort of like tried to like scare me into like complying with them and things like that. So like there are all these different scenarios running through my head of like what might happen to me and my body with this disease. And so that was a waiting game, right? Just sort of like waiting to see if you know what God said to me, which is that you're going to be fine. Like if that would actually bear out, because nothing that I saw and nothing that people were telling me like gave me any indication that that would be true. And it was true. Like, I mean, thank goodness. But I mean, I didn't know that in the moment. Like it took a while. It took a while to be sure. But yeah.
I can definitely relate to that. You know, just dealing with medical professionals regarding chronic migraine and hypermobility disorder, like the amount of explaining and advocating you have to do to the doctor, and then to people around you, trying to get them to understand what it's like. And then those conversations with God, like 1 minute you're like, okay, we gonna make it. Next minute it's like, oh, I don't know if I'm gonna make it. This is a lot, you know. So I've learned to like really try to be patient with myself. And you know, I'm a person who's like, go, do. And God has really like slowed me down. And I think having chronic illness has really taught me to just focus my energy and my time to what he's called me to do, and not worry so much about the extra stuff. Because, you know, worry, it can make things worse when you have an autoimmune disease or chronic illness. It'll send you somewhere you don't want to be in the urgent care. Like, why am I here? Because you worried.
Yeah, lots of stress. You know, I certainly think that my symptoms, and we talked about this before we went on air, but like, you know, I've recently found out that like I might not have actually had Crohn's disease at all. Like there are all these different like, you know, theories about what was actually going on. But you know, like my body was definitely responding to a lot of things. One of them was stress. Another was unprocessed trauma. And so, yeah, like absolutely, like those things have a huge impact on your health. And I am always aware of that. And, you know, I think one of the wonderful things about like taking the leap and writing full time is like, yes, like I am super stressed out about things. I worry about money all the time. Like I worry about what Christmas is gonna look like, or like what like, you know, the next 90 days are gonna look like. And I just certainly try to manage that, you know, with my faith. I try to manage it with my action. You know, I try to manage it with my belief that I'm doing the right thing. But I think that the level of stress that I was once under, like, is far greater than the stress I'm under now, which feels weird because I actually had more, like in some ways I was more secure, but I was less happy. And I think that was sort of the seed of the stress. You know, I often tell people there's nothing worse than being unhappy, like in a situation, like even if like whether it's like a professional situation or a romantic situation, because when I'm in those situations and I'm unhappy, I'm just like, where do I go? You know, like when I'm just kind of out by myself and I get lonely or I get worried, I'm just like, oh, you know, some will come my way and I'll be ready for it, right? But it's like when you're in something else, like the thought that like you're just gonna be stuck there forever, like for me creates a level of stress that just like the stress I'm under now like pales in comparison to that. Like like it's nothing compared to the stress of doing something that I do not want to do, that does not bring me joy, and that deep down I know I'm not supposed to be doing. So
that's another aspect of it too. I appreciate you sharing that. Because I remember, again, good old college. Like, it was good, but it was like heavy, super heavy on the mental health. It was super heavy on me trying to manage my symptoms. It was a lot. And like towards the last year, I was like, look, I don't want to be here. I don't want to do this. And the amount of stress that I was under then compared to now, it's like, Lord, what happened? Like, I still have a lot going on. I'm still trying to manage things, but it's hard to explain, but there's a drastic difference in the quality of stress, if that makes sense.
No, you're right. Yeah. It's a different kind, right? Like sometimes I get so worried about things. I'm like, oh my gosh, why don't I have more wrinkles? And I think it's because it's a different kind of stress, and it's a stress. I've had some really scary moments in the past 20 months of the pandemic, I guess, or maybe that's too, I can't remember, 16, 18 months of the pandemic. But even in the middle of that stress, I don't ever want to go back to the life I was living. I love the life I live right now. I love it. Like it terrifies me, but I am the happiest I have ever been, certainly in my adult life, maybe in my entire life. I am the happiest. I feel the healthiest. I feel the most present, the most aware. I feel the closest to God. I feel the closest to the people I love. And I would rather face that stress and be this happy than to try something else and lose what I have. So,
whew, that's the truth. I saw a post on Instagram. I don't know who came up with this quote, but it said, if your dreams don't scare you, then they're too small. Sounds like you're dreaming big, pretty big already.
Yeah, I'm a dreamer. I believe in go big or go home. If I fail, then I can at least be like, I tried. You know what I mean? Like, I was like, it didn't work out, but I can never say what if, because I did it. So yeah, no, I believe in dreams. Absolutely.
I hear you on that. So I noticed you mentioned your faith all throughout the conversation. I know that faith has helped me. My faith in Christ has helped me, like, through the obstacles I faced and the highs and the lows. What has your faith helped you overcome, and how has it been like your go-to in those moments?
So I think it's worked in a number of ways. Like, I'm a survivor of sexual violence. I'm a survivor of chronic illness. And I think that my faith has made it possible for me to survive those things. And sometimes it's made it possible through people. Like, I have been harmed by people, but also just deeply believe in connection and relationship and community. And so, like the faith that, having the faith that God populates my life with the people who are meant to be here, I think has been really helpful and like really powerful. And so, I mean, it's like everywhere, but I'll be honest with you, like there are things that I had to relearn about my faith. I was raised in a pretty strict environment, sort of like, I think for lack of a better word, like evangelical Christian upbringing. And there are things with that particular iteration of Christianity that I don't agree with. And so I just think that I had to come to terms with that, with like what that meant for me. And my faith grew deeper because I'm like, okay, right. Like God does not hate me, because he didn't make any mistakes with me, which is not always how I felt in those environments. Two, he does not hate me because I'm queer. He does not hate me because, you know, like all the well, I won't go. I don't know how public your podcast is. I can't go into too many details, but but like there were practices that were frowned upon, you know, like in my particular denominational upbringing that I have come to understand are actually really beautiful and like generative and like self-loving. And I had to relearn a lot of that stuff. But it's been so fascinating to like, because I think that some of those things just pushed me away, like in my early adulthood. Like I just didn't want to have anything to do with it. I wasn't like going to church. I wasn't interested. Like it just didn't do anything for me. But like I think coming back to it has been such a rich experience, and like understanding that I can have an intimate connection with God, like as I am, like as me, right? Like, and also that I can like be real with him, like, hey, I'm scared. You know, like I was kind of raised in environments where like you couldn't say things like I'm scared or I'm sad or I'm lost. Like it's been so wonderful getting to know a God who is big enough for those things. Like God is not like, God's sense of himself is not diminished by my saying I am afraid, right? He's like, cool, you're a human, right? You're supposed to be afraid. Okay, let's talk about your faith, right? Because faith and fear are not mutually exclusive. You can live in both, right? You can live with both. And you can triumph, right? Because you have in you know, in spite of the fear. And so it's just been like really wonderful, like just like learning that like right now today I like not only am I the happiest I've been, but like I am the closest to God. I feel like I'm the closest to him I've ever been. Like just in terms of my instincts, in terms of my practices, in terms of like how I treat people, in terms of like how I try to move through the world, like so much of that is faith influenced, and it doesn't feel like the chokehold that I was kind of raised to expect it to be. Like I do have a moral compass, and there are things that, you know, I struggle with doing and not doing. But like it doesn't feel like God like despises me and just like barely tolerates me because I do all of these things perfectly. Like he's big enough for my mistakes, he's big enough for my doubts, he's big enough for my personal proclivities, you know, like I just it's been wonderful to like come to know that. Yeah. Yeah. So
Two things. Thank you for sharing all of that and being vulnerable. I always, consider it an honor when people, you know, communicate those things to me. So I appreciate you for that. And two, like I can totally relate to um just experiencing the freedom that relationship with Christ brings, and like even having a church community has kept me grounded because that's part of being a Christian, having community in that aspect. But even more so, having community in like the people that God placed in my life. Like I remember growing up, like I didn't have too many people I could call friends because most of them were either jealous of me or they didn't want to be around me because I was too different for them. And I remember like praying like, God, can you send me like dope people who are Christians who are like, I can just be real and we can do life with. And, I'm thankful that I can say that today I have that type of community in my life. And I think if for those of us who get to experience that, it is a beautiful thing. And I always say that our horizontal relationships, our relationships with, the people here on earth always, should point us back to our vertical relationship, which is our relationship with God, and vice versa. And I just find it to be just a beautiful thing that keeps me grounded and appreciative, because, sometimes in our culture where we like, I gotta do me, I gotta get the bag, I gotta, but there's a whole lot of we involved. Like you need people, we need each other. And so that keeps me grounded. Now, we've talked about a lot of things, okay?
yeah.
I'm going to ask you a question that I ask all my guests, and that is this. What in life or who in your life has helped you to become better and not bitter?
Oh wow, I think that's like I think I can't point to like one single person. I would probably have to say just all kinds of people. Like, I mean, it's certainly God, right? But also my friends, who just like affirm me in like these really wonderful, beautiful ways. Like, I love my friends so much. They do so much wonderful work. And I hope I'm giving them what they give me. Um, my mom, definitely. I think that I am a person who is a dreamer, you know, but I think that that can be heartbreaking sometimes when the things that you want like just don't happen. And I'll like cry about it, you know, depending on how I feel. I might like kind of mope about it. And then the next day I usually, or you know, sometimes it may take a few days, but at some point I'll get up and I'll say, okay, well, what's next? What can I do? You know, like, and that particular way of thinking, I think, has saved me in a lot of ways, right? Because it's easy to become embittered by just like the trials of life. You know, like sometimes things happen and they're just not fair. And there's no real like logic for like why it went down. And I'm a person who loves logic and I'm always looking for logic, and I am frustrated when I can't find it. And it's easy to get lost in that, and like the things that may have happened to me, or the people who have walked away, or the things that I didn't get that I felt like I needed when I you know, at the time I didn't get them. And I think that my willingness to let go of those things and to say, okay, well, if it's not coming from this place, it's coming from somewhere because God knows I need it. Or, you know, sometimes I wanted stuff that actually didn't need at all, right? The trust in the fact that the logic is coming and that it is my job to like get up and like try again, or like get up and do something else. That's like I know that's my mom. I'm really grateful for that. So yeah, I feel like it's been a bunch of people. I think every single person God has brought into my life has like taught me something. And you know, sometimes in spite of their own intentions, right? So I feel like yeah, like it's been a bunch of people, but I think those would be sort of the top people that come to mind.
That's beautiful. And when I ask that question, I always know like people are gonna think I don't have any expectations for those answers. But it's just cool for, you know, me to understand what has kept you from being bitter. Because I think in life we always have two choices. Are we gonna let what we've been through make us better, you know, be points of lessons where God can perform surgery on our hearts so we can heal properly? Or are we going to become bitter by avoiding all of that and then thus repeat generational cycles? But that's neither here nor there for today.
Another conversation. Yeah. Well, I mean, I also say that like, you know, I grew up thinking that like because I had albinism, like I was a mistake. You know, like I was just like, you know, like
I did
know,
too.
Some stuff happened. Some stuff happened, and I just got to kind of live with the consequences. But as I've gotten older and I've gotten closer to God, certainly, but also closer to myself, like gotten a better understanding of who I am, I'm so grateful for the experience of my life. You know what I mean? Like, I am so grateful for being myself. I like, you know, people might think I look strange. Like that's their stuff. That doesn't have anything to do with me, which is something I wish I'd known as a child, because people will just put stuff on you that like have nothing to do with you. Talk. It's just like, okay, word, right? Like you cannot recognize beauty. That's your problem. That's not my problem. And it is not my responsibility to convince you of that. That was a lesson that was a long time in coming, but you know, the older I get, yeah, like, but the older I've gotten, I'm just like I am strange. I am a strange person, you know, like, but I love the strangeness. Like I think often of the verse in Psalms where I think it's David, but he's like, you made like the complicated inner workings of my body. Like I was formed in utter seclusion. Like you know me, you made me, you made all these specific things true about me before I was born. And I don't know, like that's just such a gift now to think about, right? Mm-hmm. That like I often tell people I'm like, like before I was born, God was in heaven, like picking out Black people, and he was like, hey, I got this idea.
I always say that.
It's gonna be a Black person, but with a twist. And wherever I was in the heavenly realm, I was like, send me, I'll do it.
I guess that's like, how it works.
I got you. Put me in, coach.
Yeah. I remember thinking the same thing growing up. Yeah. I was like, dang, like God. And then, learning that one, God is perfect. Two, his word is infallible. So if his word says that I'm fearfully and wonderfully made, who am I to let the projections of other people's perspective of who I should be influence who God says I am? It was written before the beginning of time. Like, you can't scrape that off my DNA. You know what I'm saying? And so
it's wild how those people's, like those opinions just don't even matter anymore. One of the things I love about being alive right now is that I live in a world where it is possible for me to be beautiful. Like it didn't feel that way like 30 years ago, but like times have changed, aesthetics have changed, people have changed, and so like internalizing that stuff forever, like the people's opinions change, right? Like why am I still carrying this around when like the even the sort of aesthetics of like public aesthetics have changed, in some ways they haven't, but in some ways they have. And so it's just it's a gift. No, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say even to that, like even because I studied cultural norms and all those things in fashion. But anyways, like all that stuff is so shaky. It's hollow, it's futile. But the one thing that keeps me encouraged is that God never changes. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. And the fact that that is true of him not only makes me love him even more, but it makes me view myself in a different way, because he knew where I was supposed to be. He knew we were supposed to be here in 2021 going through all this. But like, look, he's still giving us beauty for ashes. You're writing and performing poetry at a great level, and you're finding your niche in life. And I'm praying to do the same. But we're going to trust God with that. Before we head out, do you want to mention any social media handles, projects that people you want people to know about? I have all your information in the description as well.
Oh, cool. So like you can follow me. I'm on Twitter at Destiny O'Shea. I'm on Instagram at bird_song of the year. I have a book coming out in February called Nobody's Magic. It's a novel. It is about 3 women with albinism who live in my hometown. So if this is a subject you're into, like, buy my book. So I guess that's about it. I'm just out here, trying to stay out of trouble.
That's awesome. Well, I want to thank you again for gracing us with your presence and your wisdom and your talent and your time. And to everybody in the comment section, thank you for being here. Go ahead and leave a like, share this with somebody. And without further ado, remember to live each day with the aim of becoming better and not bitter. And I'll see you next time.